Hello, I'm James Williams from CIST 1122, and this is my midterm project. So I'm finally doing the presentation for this project. It's been a good bit. I finally got all the three parts done. I got the selection, the build, and the summary done, and I'm just going to do my quick run through all of them and explain it verbally on how this is all working. So to start off my selection, what I chose to do for this project, the selection entirely was just basically us selecting what we're going to do, hence the selection part of the name. So I just kind of went with a standard gaming PC that's not too expensive, but is pretty good. Because the thing about it is technology nowadays is super expensive no matter what. Like it's really going to be hard to find something that's, efficient that doesn't, cost dirt cheap. Most things that are even like the most like standard of stuff is going to cost like maybe a couple $100s. So what I made sure to do is, yes, this is going to be pricey, but compared to like other PCs that you could make, this isn't that bad. We just need a gaming PC. We don't need to make a rocket ship to Mars. So I just went with some decently priced stuff and didn't want to go overboard with a budget. We could do that, but I wanted to be practical with this, and I didn't want to go balls to the walls with like what I could do. So as this text right here says, I'm gonna aim for a PC that's gonna be a gaming PC, and it's just gonna be, it's gonna have good screen size, resolution, all that stuff. Good CPU, video card. The case is gonna all work with the motherboard. That's what I was mainly looking at. I basically was just gonna pick a good motherboard and start from there. That's how I looked at this entire thing. I wasn't gonna, like I said, blow a budget. And that's how I went into this, like just basically choosing the computer as a gaming computer and working from there and making sure not to go too crazy with the budget. Now, my build, here's simply my build. Uh, I cannot click on it because, okay, hold on. Oh, actually, hold on. I cannot, never mind. Hopefully you can, let me zoom in. Okay, there we go, there we go. Okay. So, yeah, this is my build. I wish you could see, actually, you can read all that, yeah. You can't see the part unless you do this, but yeah, here's my build for the stuff. Clearly, like we got the monitor and like all that. Not the monitor, my bad. We got the motherboard, the CPU, the storage, the video cards, the case, the essentials for the computer. Basically, that's what we have. Most of it's compatible. I say most of it, but all of it's compatible. I don't know why I said most, but yeah, all of it's compatible. It works together. It flows together well. Like the chipset on the motherboard works with all these pieces, so there's really nothing too much to it. I picked a pretty decently priced. As you can see, all these items are a couple hundred at most, and that's what you're gonna get. If you want something good nowadays, you gotta pay money. So what I did is I both went for stuff that lined up with the motherboard, and I also went for stuff that wasn't too pricey, but it could also run most modern day games as most gaming PCs nowadays are supposed to be able to. Okay, so that was the build, and finally we have the summary. This is just basically me explaining in detail why I picked all the pieces. So as you can see right here, for the motherboard, I picked the Asus ROG Crosshair 8 Dark Hero ATX AM4 motherboard. That's basically what you have to do from every starting point for a PC. Is when you're building a system like this, you want to start from the motherboard because the motherboard is the heart of the system. It's what everything revolves around. So you can't really not start with the motherboard. You technically could, but it's better to start with the motherboard because it's what everything's going to be built around. You don't want to build around, say, a certain processor and then be like, oh, all these items don't fit with the motherboard because then you wasted all your time. You want to start with the motherboard and build off from there because because the chipset on the motherboard is what dictates what the motherboard's compatible with. So you want to make sure that you pick a chipset slash motherboard that's good and then build off from there and have everything revolve around it. You don't want to start with one of the revolving pieces and then learn like, oh, this was all pointless. Now for my CPU slash processor, because the processor in CPU are the same thing, it's just the same thing, different name. It's basically what runs and receives like all commands slash instructions for the computer. So I went with one that worked within the chipset, and I picked an AMD Ryzen 5 5060 or 600X 3.7 gigahertz 6-core processor as my CPU. It's pretty powerful, it's decently priced, and like I said, it works within the lines of the motherboard. Most of the stuff here can be broken down to it worked within the chipsets, it's allowed to communicate with and from the motherboard, and it doesn't cost way too much. That's basically most of the rundown here. And on top of that, I also picked the Cooler Master Hyper 212 RGB Black Edition 57.3 CFM CPU cooler for the cooler for the CPU. Because I guess if you think about it, technically you could run the computer without the cooler, but that's really not wise. You don't want to do that. The CPU is going to be working really hard, so we want to give it the support it needs to properly function. Okay, then the memory module I selected was the Corsair Vengeance LPX X 16 gigabyte, which is 2 by 8 gigabyte actually. DDR4 3200 CL16 memory, and once again, the compatibility and pricing was what I chose mostly. The memory module is essentially a circuit board that's going to be installed onto the motherboard as well, so it's another board on top of the board, and it stores the important data and aka RAM that the computer is going to be running while it's going to have while it's running. So I chose it because, like I said, its pricing and performance is pretty good. However, I also chose it because computers tend to only accept one type of RAM. They only like can work within those lines. So if you got a memory module that has a different RAM than what's compatible with your motherboard slash CPU, then it's actually not going to work. So this is one of those pieces that we had to make sure would be able to work alongside the motherboard. So yes, the RAM for this memory module is also the same type of RAM that the motherboard and overall CPU is going to be using. So we wanted to go for this. So that's why I chose the Corsair Vengeance. Next up is the inboard and outbound ports. This was actually pretty simple as well, because inbound and outbound ports are relatively simple. I can basically break down what the trafficking is for it. And trafficking breaks down to, think about like a city, right? So for a motherboard, the inbound traffic will be the traffic that comes from outside the system and goes in, but the outbound traffic will be the traffic that originates from inside the system, in and out. So think of like a highway pretty much, or a city that has a highway leading into it that goes in and out. The cars leaving out, those are going to be outbound traffic. But the cars that are inbound are going to come into the city. So it's one of those things where it's like, it's really simplified, and we're going to have ports like, like CPU ports and all these other ports that allow traffic to go in and out of the motherboard. So yeah, this was pretty simple. We didn't have to really dig into it that much. And now the storage device I picked, once again, I picked the Samsung 970 EVO Plus 2 terabyte M.2 2280 NVMe solid state drive as the main storage device. Now, we could have really done a number of storage devices because there's many. Just two off the top of my head are solid state drives and regular hard drives. We picked the solid state drive because not only is it compatible with the motherboard's chipsets once again, but solid state drives, though they do, this is the one time we went with something that wasn't the probably too cheap, because solid state drives tend to cost more than hard drives because they're much more reliable and efficient. We didn't have to do this, but considering that this is completely like free form, I decided, you know what, we're going to go with the solid state drive because we're going to go for that long-term investment, and we're just going to go with the solid state drive. It's not required, but it's definitely worth the pricing, and it's really going to pay off in the end. And finally, the last two bits here are the expansion slots and peripheral devices. Now, the expansion slots, I went with basic stuff like, for example, video cards, graphic cards, or just a network card, because these are expansions. They're not the main parts of the CPU as much as the other parts. These are things that are going to enhance our gameplay. So I just chose stuff that would help enhance like a gamer's experience on this PC. And for the peripheral devices, basic stuff as well that's pretty required, but not essential, if that makes sense, to the CPU. The CPU can run without these, but it needs them. So stuff like headphones, mice, and keyboards, like little like qualities of life improvements, they're just going to make this overall system better, more usable. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, all these parts line up within the motherboard's chipsets, and they all can communicate with one another. For example, the memory module can store the RAM for the motherboard. The solid state drive that we chose can, like I said, store data, and it's compatible with the motherboard. And even the CPU, like it works along all sides of this. Like this entire computer slash system was made with the motherboard in mind from the start. So it really wasn't that hard to see how this computer would function because literally this entire thing has been built around that feature. So yeah, like I said, I'm James Williams. This has been my CIST 1122 midterm project, and I hope you enjoyed. That's it for today, and I wish you all a farewell. Bye bye.